every idea that reaches popularity must have at least some components of truth to it.
So what would be your advice for, navigating the guru world?
If they did actually have a third arm and they did actually get rid of it, you should take that seriously.
I guess that's fair.
But people have to figure out like what they're sensitive to. So for me, it's like if I undereat in general, or if I don't eat carbs, I can feel like a migraine feeling.
Welcome back to Recommended Daily Value. I'm your host, Tyler Woodward, and in today's episode, I sit down with Kyle Mamounis. Kyle is a scientist and a super fascinating guy who has been all over the place in the diet world, having done everything from raw carnivore to raw vegan and ending up in the pro-metabolic space. We discuss diet culture and how to navigate it, avoiding its pitfalls and finding its benefits. Hope you guys enjoy this one. I'll see you in there. Kyle Mamounis, welcome to the show. How you doing today?
Thank you. Good today.
I'm glad to hear it. So last time we spoke, you were working with some zebrafish. You're out in Sweden, I believe. Still, how's everything going out there?
Things are okay out here. The zebrafish are they're still here. We're all still here together, and yeah, it's
going.
Yeah, like I said, I don't know too much, have too much to say about it other than I don't believe that a significant discovery for treating diabetes or regenerating beta cells is going to emerge from this model in the way that it's being used.
Can you elaborate on that? Like, what do you think is the fault in it, and what would you do to fix it, or what would you change?
So the main, research model, I guess, is usually, so, all right, for example, zebrafish, transgenic, like a gene inserted so that, I'm not sure if I told you this last time, but every time insulin is produced, green fluorescent protein is produced. That's like the most basic zebrafish genetic line that we have. So if you have a microscope that can see the green fluorescent protein, like excite it with and see it, then you can see the beta cells with insulin in them. And there's a few problems, like the half-life of green fluorescent protein isn't the exact same as insulin protein and stuff like that. But more or less, you can see, the beta cells with insulin in them glowing green. So imagine you get like baby, like little eggs, and grow them till they just maybe start having beta cells for like 3 days or something, and then destroy all their beta cells with this kind of another layer of genetic engineering, which is to give them a gene that is produced also along with the insulin protein that is nitroreductase enzyme. And then you give them a toxin, metronidazole, that they then turn into a super toxin in the beta cells only. So this is like the type 1 diabetes model to knock out just the, kind of mimicking like, oh, what if your body just destroyed your beta cells?
Mm-hmm. So can I just reiterate that? So got zebrafish, they have a specific protein, this genetic model of the zebrafish, so that when you put them under a microscope, if there's insulin present, it lights up green, so you can tell if the beta cells are working and producing insulin. And then you're basically producing these zebrafish and then giving them a toxin to knock out all the beta cells, the insulin producing cells, so then you can see if you can cure them.
Yeah. So then you can see like if you can give them a chemical that, so you look under and it's a couple days after you give them the toxin, now all the green's gone, right? So you killed all the beta cells, there's no cells, or maybe you killed all of them and then like maybe a couple come back, you see these little tiny green specks, but say there's 2 or 3 cells where before there was like 50 or something, if you were to count them. So then have like a huge library of chemical compounds, like say 1,000 compounds or 7,000 compounds, small, the kind of small chemicals that can just kind of like get into cells. uh, and do an enormous screening process where you give these fish that you did that to these, yes, a standard kind of concentration, 10 micromolar, 20 micromolar, something, of these compounds that will just diffuse in. And then among these many thousands of treatments that you just have like a few fish and then you give this chemical, a few fish, give this chemical, maybe you find one or two where instead of just having a few lit up fluorescing beta cells after the culling of the pancreas, you have like full regeneration, or maybe half as much as before, which is like would be a big deal. So that's kind of like the ideal thing that would happen here. And then you would look at that drug and retest it, make sure it actually consistently does this. Then hopefully that drug, online in the literature, it has like a known target, some other protein or some like, usually they want to have, because it's like in developmental biology, everything is about transcription factors. So you want to find something like that and then either continue with the compound, maybe test related compounds, mess around with the dose or the testing time window, and then eventually reinforce those results if you're getting consistent results with like making another transgenic fish line that, so say your compound turns off some transcription factor, make a fish that doesn't have that transcription factor or that has it, not to get too much into the genetics, but set up in a way where you can turn it off or excise it from the practical genome by giving a yet other compound.
It's kind of knocking it out again.
Yeah. Different ways of knocking it out.
And that's just like to narrow it down that this is doing this.
Yeah. And then, okay, so say you have all of that, and then it's like, what's the pathway of that thing that is the target of this drug, and then also this transgenic manipulation you did. And then you would, I guess that would be a paper, and you would say, okay, this is turning this down or knocking this out by drug or by genetic manipulation allows other pancreas cells. And you can actually, it gets even more complicated from there. Then you would want to say, okay, which cells are turning into beta cells now, right? Is it maybe the alpha cells, the glucagon producing cells? Maybe they're flipping and switching to beta cells in the influence of this drug or lack of this transcription factor that would normally be expressed, but you have this genetic mutation or whatever knockout thing that where it's not being expressed. And so on and so on and so on, right? And then maybe like you use all of this to justify like a mouse experiment or a rat experiment, and then and then I guess it would kind of like leave this lab and go somewhere else, maybe. So that's like a very simple, like kind of workflow of what would be like the ideal kind of results in this situation. But the thing that I think is the problem, because a lot of people do this, it's been done for a while. It kind of, you just end up writing papers about zebrafish developmental biology. I don't think that the idea, like the underlying idea of just giving a compound to an organism, say, the day after you destroy its beta cells, is so you're giving it to the whole body, first of all. So that's one problem. And yeah, it just seems to me like developmental biology is probably very normal. Developmental biology is pretty surgical. Like cells figure out like, I'm a pancreas cell, Oh, actually, yeah. And I'm going to, like, here's my job. I'm going to become an alpha cell, or a beta cell. Like, and I know this because some type of quorum sensing with, or, relationship with the cells around me that's like giving me this communication through, paracrine signaling and endocrine or whatever. So there's probably things turning on and off at a very like cyclical or, this hour of development, especially in something like a zebrafish that grows, in 30 days or whatever. It's like almost adult sized. So this would be like real fast, like, maybe this gene turns on, makes some sort of protein and then turns off like pretty fast. Or maybe 2 or 3 things have to coordinate. So the idea that one drug, like basically what I'm saying is the kind of experiments, like if you had a library of thousands of drugs, what you'd really want to do is test them all like in combination, different combinations with each other, which takes the 7,000 and turns it into like 1,000,000 combinations. Or I guess if you really wanted to test all of them in combination, it would be like billions or something. I mean, each. So obviously that's not tenable, right? And then also across different time courses. So maybe like these 2 compounds for 6 hours, wash the cells, and then add this third one. Like that's, and this is just purely based on like kind of my sense of how biology, developmental biology, like kind of works naturally or probably works. That's probably close to something that you might expect to get like a precise result on the type of cells that you want, the type of tissue differentiation or whatever.
And what you're saying with that is kind of, we imagine developmental biology is like these switches turning on, makes a protein, yada, yada, yada. You want to basically be able to reverse engineer that. So you turn the switch off at the exact right time and then turn it back on or whatever. So it's like, you're basically just kind of skipping over that part where it would develop the beta cells in the exact manner it would. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. So we're trying, to reverse engineer that because there's tons of cells left over in the pancreas, like after you destroy the beta cells. And in real life, when people have type 1 diabetes, they don't really lose pancreatic mass in the glucagon producing cells or the somatostatin producing cells, or there's all kinds of like ductal cells, and stuff in between that just hold everything together that probably have some level of ability to be programmed, because, it's starting from one cell, right? And then you 4, 2, 4, and then you get like the 3 germ layers, if you remember that kind of stuff. And then you get closer and closer to like terminal cells. So something that's in the same tissue, but not the same terminal cell has gone through a lot of the same differentiating processes as its neighbor. So that's kind of like, theoretically what you would expect to be the target to that if you could flip. So anyway, the point is what for practical reasons, it's, you're kind of just like, it's sort of like, bringing a hammer to a surgical thing or like a chainsaw or whatever to do like a pretty fine dissection. Because like I said, the number of possibilities of combinations of compounds, put in one drug on, taking it off, then adding 2 or something. And then the time course, like, 36 hours after whatever event, versus 24. Like, because when you see, if you just look at natural developmental biology and people have figured out like, okay, at 12 hours post-fertilization in the zebrafish at 28.5 degrees Celsius, this gene turns on in these tissues, and if we knock that gene out, then you don't get whatever. Then you don't get beta cells. It's actually pretty easy like that. The easy part is like it's pretty easy to find things that you can knock out that will mess things up. So anyway, it's difficult when you have ideas like that bouncing around in your head, and yet your day-to-day work is to just sort of do the apply compounds or come up with some type of like, I'm doing a slightly different screening than I'm not knocking out beta cells. Right now I'm taking the fish and giving them drugs and seeing if instead of like a kind of tight mass of beta cells, they're kind of scattered, or like two kind of split islets, or just something irregular like that. And hopefully it would be a drug that induces some cell that normally wouldn't have the beta cell fate to become beta cells. So I'm just looking for like, things that a beta cell that looks like it's in the wrong place or whatever.
Oh, okay. All right, that makes sense. So you're trying to narrow down what cell is becoming the beta cell in that?
Well, that would be after finding like a reliable, like I do find I've seen some things. Unfortunately, most of the time when I look in the microscope and I see a scattered kind of broken or split islet, beta cell islet of Langerhans, it's the fish is kind of messed up, like otherwise, like it's hasn't hatched out of its chorion is the most common, so it's still like folded like in a circle. Because what you want is for them, like, again, the ideal would be the fish is totally normal. The body plan is developing like up to speed with ones that aren't given any drugs at all, and it just like has a bunch of beta cells, like it has sort of a normal mass of beta cells, and then like some somewhere else or something like that.
Gotcha.
So, and that's pretty hard to find because usually it's like, again, giving the drug to the whole body. So it's like, if it's a drug that's powerful enough to induce alternative fates in cells like that, obviously that, going to do something.
Makes sense. All right, well, cool. So, hopefully we'll hear from you soon, and when you discover the cure to diabetes, we'll be waiting, or switch fish. But today we're going to talk about a little bit about diet culture. So Kyle is the resident expert in diet culture. He's been through all of them. He's actually emigrated to Sweden to hang out in their diet culture, and is learning the Swedish diet culture language. So what do you think is really wrong with diet culture? What's at the root of that? And I guess let's define diet culture as it's kind of an anomalous definition, but it's just, you kind of noted that you can go into it kind of treating diets as religion, right?
Yeah, that's what I wrote. And a lot of this is still like really quite a bit from my experience. So my experience when I really like believed in diets, and what I mean by that is like, when you find out about something like raw veganism, let's just assume like you don't know anything and you're like 18 and you get on the internet and somebody that for some reason, I don't know, it just seems like they have some kind of secret information and they're like, oh, you know what? You'll like never get sick if you just don't eat cooked food and you just eat raw fruits and vegetables. Because that's what animals do and they don't get human diseases. And you're like,
this makes so much sense.
So that kind of belief where you're like, yeah, you know what? I don't even care if somebody's like coughing on me because I don't have the toxins of the cooked food. So I actually can't contract a cold, like, even assuming viruses exist or bacteria exist or whatever. You're like loser with your germ theory of disease. Like I'm so ascended above that and the things of that nature. So that kind of belief, definitely religious. And it felt that way. And I don't think it's a coincidence that most of the people, I can't really say most of the people are not religious that get into these things. Let me put it this way. I don't think somebody like Paul Saladino, a big part of his life is like going to church or having some kind of transcendental belief. The guy, it's kind of old hat to talk about him, but he's like the touchstone. Like I've so removed myself from that world that I don't know if there's like a funnier guy to talk about, like new plagiarizing sort of shitty guru dropped. I'm sure that's happened, but if you look at, from what I remember, the guy, he moved to like Costa Rica or something, somewhere, and just surfs all day and eats the most is it sought after or valued foods, or how does he
I
describe
think sought after.
high value food? Yeah. He's a high value male. So there's a lot of values and a lot of like, I mean, if you took away his belief in the diet and that like he's going to have like a fulfilling life, it seems like his life is fulfilling and meaningful because of what he believes about his nutritional regimen. And the rest of it is essentially just like hedonistic nihilism, right? Like he just surfs.
Yeah. So it's substituting, you know, where a religious belief may take place for a dietary religious belief almost.
Yeah. Yeah. And also, I think let me just reread what I wrote here. It's politics and/or identity. Yeah. So people these days, I mean, if you look at, if you went to a place like, have you seen, it's been going around, people have sent me a few videos of it's like Mongolians or something.
Oh no.
Like Mongolians in a sort of like Genghis Khan tent, like a big tent, like a house tent, cooking like organs or something, like a traditional Mongolian sheep liver, sheep stomach stew, right? Filmed on a nice camera and uploaded to the internet. So I don't know, I don't know to what level this is like legit or some type of whatever marketing campaign for something. But yeah, I mean, Mongolian people have a food culture and they have an identity. So to them, it's like if you came up and said, let me explain to you why this is good. Like they already, there's just like slots that the human brain is just like when you're born and you look up and like, your body is expecting to see like human eyes. Like I think there have been studies, where babies like even just like, fresh out of the womb will follow eyes, like with their eyes, even though their eyesight is very, very bad at that point. But they're like preconditioned, just like an instinct, like how certain animals, they don't have to be taught to like jump back from snakes. There's like certain hardwired things. So humans are, the most social, or at least it seems that way to us. So what I'm suggesting is, we're hardwired for fitting into, groups and having an identity. And a lot of those things in our times have been like,
washed away,
out of fashion. Yeah. So, and this is also why I mentioned the diet culture is characterized by shibboleths. So it's like, if it was totally rational, like if you imagine like an 18th or 19th century rationalist who had his like religious stuff kind of taken care of and knew who he was and was just talking about nutrition, they'd be like, oh, this is good. Oh, okay. Like I'll add this to my diet. But the way diet culture is like, no. When we say something's bad, like you have to remove it from your diet. And when we say this is what your diet should be based on, like you can't do a diet halfway. Like you can't do raw veganism halfway. That if you were on one of these websites where people talk about that diet or low carb, you can't be like, oh, carbs are bad, or you're saying carbs are bad, or you're saying there's a benefit to eating more fat and protein and less carbs. All right, well, I'll drop my carbs. I'll cut out half my carbs. They'd be like, that you're not in the group, right? You're not, because that a shibboleth of that group is that you actually cut out carbs, or maybe, less than 80 grams a day or whatever, like the particular opinion is in that group at that time.
Dalton from Analyze and Optimize, I don't know if you know them. He put it to me last week, I think, that it's kind of like team sports. And that's exactly what it is. Because it's like you can't just play for the other team like halfway. Like you go above 80 grams of carbs, it's like you're out of here. It's not, you're not accepted in our little group.
Right. And I guess to an extent, like if the, scientific theory is that you do need to cut out X amount of carbs to get the benefits, then it makes sense that they would just be like, I mean, you're not really doing the diet, but they're kind of all that way. Like if you were on a raw vegan forum and you were like, oh, I'm really going to try to like increase the amount of fruits and vegetables I'm eating and like decrease the everything else. Some people might be like, good for you, but nobody's going to be like excited because you're not really, it's like, you don't believe in it. Like you don't actually believe like, yeah, I can sustainably be on this diet. This is all I need. I want to live this way, have this lifestyle. And yeah, I don't think people in places where they still have kind of like strong social connections, like, I don't know, if you just went to like
Mongolia.
Yeah, Mongolia. Yeah, people are not thinking of it that way there. Of course, it's kind of hard to find a place that maybe has similar like scientific absorption or whatever into the culture. But I mean, even in Europe, right? Like Italian people, you're probably not going to find a lot of Italian people who are going to just give up the foods, the total diet manipulation, right? Like give up whatever they grew up on that is so central to their culture and their identity for like, now I believe in this, right? I'm going to cut out all carbs, no pasta. And I don't think it's just because they like pasta, it's because they sort of have a base of like a thing that they're doing, and they may like add on to that. It's like, oh, I'm going to supplement with like 20 grams of collagen a day. That sounds like a good idea. But like, oh yeah, and also you have to not eat anything that you normally eat and eat these things instead. Like that's not going to work. Whereas for people that are kind of like church shopping, diet wise, like there's kind of like a church shopping thing these days. I don't know if you've noticed, but it became like a politically cool thing to become Catholic online a few years ago.
Don't remember that, but it's definitely possible.
And now it's cool to be like Orthodox online, Christian Orthodox. So there's a lot of people that like were some type of Protestant sect, like in America and in the West. And then they became Catholic because it was like more based. And then they became like Orthodox to become like the most based. And I just find it hard to believe that they, that transition was for like a really sincere, heartfelt reason, So in other ways, people are looking for identity. But
how do you think, having gone and lived in Europe, they seem to have a much more, their diet culture seems to be a little bit more foundational. Like you mentioned Italy, where everyone knows the Italians are eating some pasta and some good bread and all that stuff. How does that compare? You've been in Sweden for a couple of years compared to the US, where you obviously spent a lot of time.
Well, Sweden doesn't have a cuisine as such like Italy or France does. But I mean, they have foods. They have foods that it's like, lingonberries. You know about those?
Mm-mm.
If you go to IKEA, like the things the things that they sell that are like Swedish. So like lingonberry, it's kind of like cranberry. It's like a tart berry, and then it's like jarred. You could just eat the berries, but usually it's kind of mixed with like some sugar or something and made into like a spread. Yeah. So in the city where I spend basically all of my time, it's not a whole lot different here. There's a lot of other ethnic restaurants. Like there's probably, because there are Swedish restaurants, but it's very hard to pin down what exactly that is. It's like you go there and it's like, of course, like meatballs and like Swedish meatballs.
Those
is
are
going to be on the menu. But it's not a big robust menu of like famous dishes, So they are definitely like xenophilic with their cuisine here in the city. They love different things. But yeah, it's like at the my girlfriend, she says at her old school lunches used to be like salmon and potatoes, and like they would even have like blood pudding during different seasons because it's just like traditional. And yeah, stuff like that, like pretty wholesome foods, right? Not like you know, I don't know what kind of school lunches you had, but from like a chicken, like a
Fried chicken
breaded
sandwich.
chicken patty, yeah. Or
Classic.
you know, like a shitty kind of rectangular pizza. Or actually, I think the ones were circular for a while, and they were just not that good. So you grow up like that, and then you just kind of have a vague idea, even if like your parents don't really, you know, you have a vague idea of like things that you could cook, because like salmon and potatoes is like you can kind of see what it is. Whereas like if you're getting like a chicken patty sandwich, it's like, you know what I mean? Like that doesn't inspire you. That's not the kind of thing you'd be like, oh, I can make that at home because like I'm looking at the thing right here. Like it's just, you know, you cook these potatoes, and it's like this whole, you know, it's like, who knows where that came from, right? It's like processed chicken. It's breaded with something. It doesn't really look like, you couldn't look at it and just be like, know what the ingredients are.
Yeah. It's not like this salmon just came from the river where like, and just put it on my plate after it was grilled.
Yeah. So I think people are a little more like but I mean, there is a traditional kind of American diet in some places. Like I'm sure there's places where people grow up eating, you know, their parents like bake things, you know, like meatloaf or something.
Too. Yeah. I'm just thinking the out west, probably like just rural cow farmers, lots of steak, ground beef, and you know, probably potatoes and hamburgers and things like that.
Yeah. But yeah, so I wouldn't really say that there's like an enormous difference, but there are a lot of food related functions, and they kind of go with the year. So like there's a Christmas meal called like Yule board, and usually families will go to a restaurant that serves like this kind of Christmas meal around Christmas time, and then usually like your work might have that too with all your coworkers. And then there's different holidays that are associated with different kind of like pastries or different foods. Like in August, you eat crayfish. And there's something at least to that kind of cyclical like culture. I mean, in America, it's like Easter eggs, but at this point, it's more about kids finding candy than like a food, really. I mean, people will dye the eggs and I guess eat them.
I don't think I've never eaten them.
So yeah, imagine more like you eat the thing and it's not like a toy or like part of a gimmick to get chocolate, to like find chocolate that's hidden around the yard or the house or whatever. So I think that's a big difference. But again, it doesn't need to be like, there's only, I don't know, not even one of those things per month here. But they do exist, and they do kind of give people the idea of like food as a thing that has to do with something.
What's available seasonally kind of thing.
Yeah. And part of their identity in some way. Unlike America, where it's like, yeah, like the school lunch, the school lunch in America doesn't reinforce who you are. I mean, it does in a negative way. Like, yeah, I'm a Marifat who's eating like this crappy pizza. But yeah, it's not like, yeah, I'm sure I've never been to Italy. I don't know anything about what goes on with kids having lunch at school there, but I can't imagine that it's not a focus of their culture, you know, to make sure that like the kids eat something that has to do with like Italian cuisine.
Do you think that's why America is so, or maybe not America, but the diet culture is so all or none, where it's like you're either full all in on keto or carnivore or paleo or whatever it is, or you just kind of don't care and you eat whatever you want. Maybe eventually you buy some organic food instead of some regular conventional food. But there's this huge like disparity between, doesn't really matter what I eat. I kind of throw into my mouth the school lunch menu as an adult versus I'm in X team or camp and I only eat this way.
I think that I think that it's like a sublimation of politics. And it really, I don't really think it has too much to do with food at all. Um, I think it's that people, because if you look, like, there's kind of different diets that are politically, especially these days, they're very, they're targeted. So like, I saw that somebody was saying, years ago, there's the big libertarian movement with Ron Paul. And I started seeing all of these people talking about like carnivore type stuff or low carb stuff around that. There was a Bitcoin investor I used to watch in 2017, the last, the Bitcoin cycle where the price went up to like $20,000. What was his name? Tone something. Anyway, he had this group called like Bitcoin Carnivory. So it was like people that were into Bitcoin and into the carnivore diet. And there was something about kind of like vague libertarianism and eating a lot of meat and maybe not eating carbs that like fit together. Whereas if you think of vegetarianism, that fits really well with, like, you imagine like a campus protest culture, like people that are like against the exploitation of like third world workers and animals. And it used to be kind of just that. It was like the vegetarians had a thing and everybody else was just like, it was almost like the Atkins craze in the second wave of the craze after he was already gone, was almost a reaction to that, because it was like, yeah, fuck you. Like, I'm going to eat, like, oh, you're not eating any animals. Like, well, I'll eat your serving, you know? And it, kind of like today, how like somebody in North Carolina, like would, you know, with the truck where they have that tuning where they can make the smoke come out of the muffler.
Oh,
You know
yeah.
what I'm talking about? It's called rolling coal.
Okay.
Like if there was like an environmental protest or like some climate change protest, and then somebody with their truck kind of like does that thing and then like makes them all cough with the smoke. So it's kind of like an element of this factionalization, and that people that maybe the Atkins diet or low carb in general, it's like they need a foil. Like if you see debates online, it's not really a debate between somebody who's like 50% carnivore and somebody who's 100%. It's like a debate between a carnivore and a vegetarian. So essentially like kind of mimicking or like play acting reliving like a presidential debate between a Democrat and a Republican. In some way, it's almost like this subconscious, like, oh, like we have, like this is the form that it takes, and nobody had to tell them that. They just know that's the form it takes. Of course, if I'm going to argue about this diet, I'm going to argue with somebody on the other team, on the other side, and like I subconsciously understand how that looks.
Yeah, you're not debating nuance, you're debating like the whole picture.
Yeah. Because would anybody watch? I mean, it would be interesting to look at, I don't know, somebody who's like, oh yeah, I'm doing the Mediterranean diet. Like I cut a lot of meat out of my diet and I eat a lot of, you know, some fish, a little bit of meat, a lot of like vegetables and stuff. And then somebody who's like a pure vegetarian. But it's like that wouldn't generate the kind of mimetic energy, because what people really want is to like see like a clash of like a zealous battle, where one side will like vanquish the other, which never happens because they just talk past each other. But it's like people tune in because it's like, yeah, my guy like smashed the other one and he's dumb, whatever. That's why I hate Bart K. You know, the guy's from like New Zealand or something. He's actually, because Paul Saladino kind of has this like fake, well, I don't know if it's fake, but very positive energy. And I guess Liver King, is he still around? Did he die yet? Did he lose an eye? Is he okay? Yeah. Should we call him?
We should. We should definitely check in. I haven't been
connecting.
Liver King. I haven't checked in with him recently. I think his eye is recovering. I think he went back on steroids. but
to
he's
save
good.
the eye.
Yes.
Right. So, but Bart K, if anybody wants to just, it's like I have trouble watching stuff like that because even if I agreed with him, and this is how you can tell if you're in a cult or whatever. That's like such a loaded word, but whatever. Bart K, if you agree with him, he should still turn you off because he's just such an asshole and he's so negative for kind of no reason. Like I could almost understand if somebody just teared into him and was such a dickhead first, like they made some video where they just, the straw man everything he says, misrepresent it, ad hominem all over the place, that kind of thing. And then his response is to just be a total dickhead. It's like I could kind of see that, but it's like he starts it. That's his baseline thing is to just call everybody like retarded, or he has like these like kind of, is he from New Zealand or Australia?
I'm not sure. One of the two.
Yeah. So he has like their phrases, like he called me like, God, I can't even remember.
He called me something too online. I was debating him at one point.
Nice. Yeah. He has like these Aussie phrases that don't mean anything to an American. So it's like not even that offensive.
Get fucked, Bart K.
But yeah, so the people that are into him and into that extreme conflict, like just existing in the world of conflict all the time and at 100%, those people are like, they kind of don't care about nutrition. And like they're on this, like if you were to say you have a spectrum for this, they would be about as far as you could get towards like, this is how I find value and meaning and identity in my life is by picking a side and calling the other side retarded. Like it's sort of,
yeah,
which is kind of like a pathetic version of like a war.
But just like picking on toddlers.
Yeah. Well, it's just kind of like instead of, anything meaningful. First of all, you're on the internet, probably behind an anonymous avatar, and you're calling somebody retarded who might even be a bot. So whereas on the other side, right, it would be somebody who is like very positive and is kind of maybe open to changing their mind. Even, maybe not, I don't know, maybe they really feel that they've done a lot of research and believe what they believe, but like they're not in it for like the neural reward of like scoring a point, on the other side or something like that. So you have this spectrum. So a healthy culture would, people would cluster towards what I just said, but the internet and various other reasons that we kind of blah, blah, blah about earlier is clustering people towards the Bart K fan style, where it's like, or like internet blood sports. Remember when that was a thing? With debates, and you missed all the good stuff. But just the idea that you would have a debate about a topic and it's kind of understood that you're not sitting up there doing like an Oxford style debate respectfully, but you're kind of making it like what's it called? Spectacle.
Okay. Yeah.
So like Bart K, whether or not he says things that are like scientifically valid or makes good points, he's making a spectacle of himself. And Paul Saladino is too, but not quite as negatively, but he's like, hanging 10 out there and like
kind of like Lane Norton too, right? Would you say? I
haven't seen, what does he do?
He's like,
I know his diet thing, but like what kind of content does he make?
He just makes like, he calls it What the Fitness, and it's basically just roasting Saladino and probably like the Bart K's of the world. But and I'm not saying that he is kind of negative in some ways, because if you're not with the evidence, you basically will just call you dumb.
Yeah.
But I think like the bigger issue is like when you have these spectacles, it's like, and this is really what YouTube is in some ways. Like you're watching these debates, but it's just, me in my corner making my video, and then Kyle makes a video yelling back at me. but we're just basically talking through each other to a screen. You know, we're not actually addressing each other's points. We're just yelling at each other.
Yeah, I would say that he's just based on like the few things I've seen of his and what I understand about his personality. I think he just knows what you have to do to like get your content to get a large amount of viewership. I don't know if he would. Well, I'll put it this way. I don't think he's the kind of guy that Bart K is, you know?
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, you basically have to. I think I wrote that, you know, that poem that I wrote about the diets or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
I think at one point I wrote something about you have to be a clown. You have to make yourself a clown or some line like that. I think people kind of understand that with internet content in general, like, which is probably why I'll never be really famous on the internet, because I just can't do it. Like I can't, you know, like when you see those YouTube ads where somebody's like, oh, don't click away from this ad because you're chosen as like one of 100 people to see this video about my investing program. And they're just like, and they're walking while they're saying this, and and behind them are like a bunch of sports cars that they rented to make the video that are not theirs. And they're essentially just like kind of lying or whatever you want to call that.
Yeah.
I could like, I don't know if I could ever do that, you know, to get money and to get like, to do a spectacle like that. It's just not my personality. And it's unfortunate, but that's kind of what attracts people, but that's just what it is. So
so I would make the argument, and I don't really follow Bart K much, but like Saladino is kind of, you know, I would say in some sense, and he's dialed back in a lot of ways. He's doing kind of good for the world in my views. Like, you know, he's kind of off the animal base, basically pushing Ray Pete diet. Probably should give Ray Pete a little bit more credit than he does. But how do you rectify doing, because he is making change, and like I would think you would agree that change needs to be made. How do you kind of level the two where it's just like, you know, you kind of have to play into the clown game, but you also shouldn't be a complete douche in the aspect of doing it? So how do we solve diet culture, I guess, is the question.
Yeah, well, I think that I don't think that can be done. I think that these things have to, it's like a bunch of people sitting around a table, like, how can we prevent World War from breaking out like the night before World War I? Like sometimes things just have to happen. Like people have already become a lot more sophisticated about things they see on the internet. It's like it's kind of an arms race. Like I remember when Google first started phishing your emails for targeted ads. I don't know if you remember that. It was like well over 10 years ago. And the first few times I saw a targeted ad, I was like, I was just thinking about that. Like, this is awesome. And then, you know, at this point, I guess very old people maybe are not hip to this, but people understand like, yeah, oh, wow. Like, a Sega Genesis, like, thing at Urban Outfitters, like on the website that I'm getting this sidebar ad for that has all the games that I liked as a kid. Wow. Like, how did this ever happen? I have to click on that and buy it. Like, they kind of understand that like you're going to be shown things that these like artificial intelligences think will make you buy things or at least click on things. So in the same way, diet culture, you know, the methods to get people to click and everything evolves, and then people get a little bit more savvy about, you know, even just like the Lane Norton thing, like buying into something like that is already a step up, because I think he's engaging with a little bit more critical thinking and a little bit more like, you know, than somebody like Bart K. Like Bart K will take any result of any experiment to prove that carnivore is good. Like, it doesn't really matter. I think Lane Norton is probably capable of even changing his opinion.
Yeah, for sure.
So that's already like a step up. And so basically what I'm saying is like the evidence-based community represents a sophistication of people online. Like they want something more sophisticated. They don't just want somebody to be like, yeah, if you just eat raw meat and that's it, then you'll just like never get cancer and heart disease and stuff. And you don't, and if you eat carbs, it'll be bad. And any experiment that doesn't support what I just said is like funded by big carb or so, you know what I mean? Like where, so that would be, and that a lot of people just like bought into that, like early Gary Taubes stuff. And he said crazy things about like that. He had a debate, I think on Joe Rogan with Stephen Guyenet, like a long time ago, like 5 years ago. He was just kind of yelling at, because I remember at one point he had to, I don't know if he apologized, but like he was just kind of talking, like the Stephen Guyenet was like, look, obesity, really seems to be caused by the brain sort of reward system, like not getting rewarded enough from food or being in some way overstimulated and just causing people to eat more than they're burning. Like when normally there should be kind of like a match there. And he's like, no, it's just carbs. And it was kind of like a very stark, like difference in sophistication and maybe like pulling from the literature and things like
versus like a narrative almost.
Yeah. So I think it's just a natural process. Like, we're just like we're just two guys. And it's the people are going to like, they're going to chew up Ray's stuff, and integrate it into their thing. And people are good. Like, and in 5 years, things that maybe seem stupid now that a lot of people bought in on, like the Liver King. I mean, look at how that whole thing imploded. It's unfortunate that it took somebody actually just being like, here's his steroid protocol, like from his doctor, to get people to realize the guy is on steroids, which I've been like joking about. I mean, I've got like 2,000 Instagram followers or something. So obviously there's a question of reach there, but I had people being like, I didn't have very many people saying, oh, maybe he is natural. But in places other than my DMs, there was, even fairly sophisticated bodybuilders who took steroids and know what it looks like to take steroids, believed him for a time. And that's a really bad sign. And it's a good sign if you start seeing like maybe a faster turnover. So like new guy shows up with some dumb gimmick, people are skeptical of it. That's what would represent a change in the internet culture around diet and stuff.
So a lot of these diets, they have, and part of the issue with this in diet culture in general is that a lot of the diets have things right. Would you say that they have pieces right, but just not the whole picture?
Yeah, I actually have a theory of everything, which is that every idea that reaches popularity must have at least some components of truth to it, or else, because people are always like, oh well, like I'll say I don't like Jordan Peterson, and they'll be like, yeah, well some of the stuff he says is good, and it's like, what the fuck? Like, when has there been a person that only says incorrect stuff? Like, what the fuck does that have to do with anything? Like, it's just the reason why I'm making this a point is because that is so absurd, but people do it all the time. So they'll be like, oh no, but some of the stuff he says is good. Like, yeah, just like everyone else ever. Like, yeah. There has never been somebody who is lying 100% of the time, wrong 100% of the time, even 50% of the time. I mean, do you know how hard it would be to be wrong about half of everything like that you're talking about? I mean, I guess if you have a kind of core principle like carbs are bad, in one way you could look at that as them being wrong about everything because that's their central tenet. But as like we were just kind of getting into, like, yeah, I mean, they have things to say about protein, and just how about just like animal protein is a good source of, the kind of amino acids we need to rebuild our tissues versus like beans, beans by themselves or whatever. Like you have to do all kinds of food combining to get like a good amino acid profile. So that's just one thing that, meat eaters have that is like pretty, pretty solid. Makes a lot of sense. Maybe you shouldn't eat like tons and tons and tons of protein all the time. Maybe you don't need as much as they're saying. But the protein quality argument that they're making is, it's hard to disagree with.
Yeah.
So it's no, like with Paul Saladino, like my metric is not how, I don't know. I'd rather sort of hear what somebody has to say that I feel is like a sincere person that I disagree with more than somebody who's like maybe adopting some ideas to, kind of like sticking finger in wind style, who maybe superficially agrees with more things, because
you're kind of saying like kind of throwing everything at the wall and seeing what sticks in terms of getting the message and then kind of riding with whatever people want to hear.
Well, I just mean like if there's a sincere vegetarian
mm-hmm.
and they're like, look, blah, 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 all this research about heart disease and like vegetarianism versus meat eating. Look at all the, I mean, there's a lot of good reasons to believe in vegetarianism. Like if you just look at the gurus of vegetarianism, they tend to live a pretty long time. Compared to like how long? Well, I think actually Atkins himself lived to his 80s, but a lot of famous like meat eating, large high meat eating diet people died more like say in their 60s. Like not super impressive.
Mm-hmm.
And those are all real points, and that's a conversation that would be.
He was 72.
Okay, yeah, so like basically like the average age.
But he died of a blood clot, so he must have been not everything he said was wrong.
Could be. Yeah, he should have died of something. He should have stepped out in front of like a car like the day before the blood clot got him, and then that would be much better for his legacy.
He would have lived forever if he hadn't gotten hit by that car.
Yeah,
that makes sense.
So somebody like Paul Saladino, I don't know. I like when I look at the guy, I don't really understand him as a person. And it's like, does he actually eat testicles often? Or, you know what I mean? And does he like them, or like,
is he doing this to put on a charade?
Yeah. Like, I don't know. I just don't get like a good feeling about it,
So what would be your advice for, navigating the guru world and trying to find the Ray Peats of the world, I guess?
So it's like, just like in science, it's kind of easier to falsify. So it's easier to do that thing than find something that's like true or factual or whatever. So unfortunately for, whatever content, like people on Instagram that are like 20 years old and like ripped and want to be like a health influencer, or like, girls in bikinis or whatever. I mean, it doesn't, obviously I'm not going to put them out of business because I'm not going to reach their audience before. But if you're somebody who's interested in, finding good information, you should probably just throw all that shit out. Like, just like, don't counter signal it. Don't argue with people. Don't write under their picture, well, of course you look good, you're 21 years old. It's not there. It's just invisible. Okay, just forget about it. It's like they're talking about what do people talk about? Football? I don't know. They're talking about something else. They're having a different conversation. So you could find somebody that had a problem and maybe overcame that problem. Specifically, if you have that problem, like there's a lot of women that make these like fertility kind of things and that had issues like they were too lean, stopped menstruating. And then, so like if you're trying to figure that out for yourself, right? That's an easy one. But yeah, I mean, I don't want to say you shouldn't listen to somebody unless they're like, you know, over 60 years old, because that's silly. But a lot of these ideas have antecedents, and it's like there's somebody saying something like whatever, Paul Saladino, and looking at like if he had some type of lineage of people that have done a similar diet. And it's like, if you can't find good examples of people that lived a long time doing that, then, you know, like don't just like look at the one person, because that's the thing with gurus. It's like one person is the focus. It's a relationship between you and one person. And that person has like kind of secret information, which is why they can't really say, oh, I got this from like Ray Pete or whatever.
Yeah. To kind of push back though on like the disease thing, I feel like that can also run into problems, because it's like, you know, my thing could be, I don't know, I have a third arm, and you know, the way I got rid of my third arm was digestive enzymes, you know, and like that was the solution. And it's just like, but like I feel like that happens, right? Like it's just like this is the answer, and that's kind of like their secret sauce.
Well, yeah, but if they did actually have a third arm and they did actually get rid of it, you should take that seriously.
I guess that's fair.
But I mean, people lie all the time about things, but like, you know, like somebody that like lost weight, like, you know, who lost weight, that I thought was a very interesting thing was that comedian, magic comedian guy, you know, Penn and Teller.
I think so.
Penn Jillette, I think. So I think one of them's like really big and tall, and the other one's kind of short. So I think Penn Jillette is the big one. And he was big, like he was big everywhere. It's big, just big guy. And he lost a ton of weight on the potato diet or potato hack diet, which I think is a very interesting diet because it sort of addresses what I think is a major issue, which is absorbed endotoxin. And so to me, it's like when I see that, I'm like, oh, well, that kind of makes sense. And that's interesting. And when you hear him talking about it, he's just kind of saying his experiences, you know? And it's like, to me, that's much more valuable than somebody who's like trying to sell you something. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's just like, what's the average, like if you just went on Instagram, I mean, what's the average thing that you see?
Well, I feel like my Instagram is very skewed towards a bunch of nerds and like bodybuilding, like education, biomechanics. But I mean, it's probably, it's probably memes, and you know, pop culture. Basically, it's your new tabloids.
But like nutrition stuff.
Okay, for nutrition stuff. I mean, dude, right now it's just supplements. I feel like everyone's just like, this is like, take this for this.
Yeah.
Maybe that's not the answer you were looking for.
Well, I'm just trying to get an idea of like what people are even navigating, because I don't know. I mean, here's like an easy thing you could do. Just get like something old, like an old book of like recipes or an old nutrition book from like a long time ago, like pre-internet, and not like a diet, but like for example, here in Scandinavia, like there's traditional Scandinavian diet books. Like I have this one in my Amazon wish list that I guess it's not in print anymore. The cheapest copy is like $80. So I don't know if I'm going to buy it, but it's called like Icelandic something and cookery. It's like Icelandic food and cookery or something like that. So if you just start with something like that, or if you're already kind of, you know, the Sally Fallon book, Nourishing Traditions.
Yeah.
That kind of gives you like
a good baseline.
Yeah. It gives you a lot more than like an argument, which is really all that a lot of internet content gives you. It's like a lot of people are probably just arguing about these diets and they're not even on them. You know?
Yeah.
Whereas like if the content is itself food recipes and like places to get the different foods or whatever, it's like much less like you're not going to argue about that. It's like, oh, here's a recipe for like cooking liver. Like, okay. Like, it's not like you need to eat this, you know?
It's almost like taking people's experiences. So like, you know, the guy that cured his third arm, you could take that and how he did it and say, okay, I can register with that. But you don't have to buy into the person itself. Like, you can take what he learned, kind of like reading a book, you know, you can gain experiences through the acquisition of reading versus having to have done it yourself.
Yeah, I mean, that's the way it should be, but it's not. And the internet is like concentrated it not being that way. By the way, what's Lane Norton's like? Do you know his basic like recommendation? Does he have a basic recommendation?
So it's basically calories in, calories out. That's his thing. All that matters is being like, his thing is like weight loss and getting to an optimal body composition. And he really just, he thinks the data seems to be kind of mixed. Like, it doesn't matter if you're carb, low carb, high fat, low fat, just eat not too much calories. I think he tends to lean a little bit against saturated fats, but mostly in monounsaturated fats. It's kind of like a more balanced approach.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Not too much to say about that. One of my professors said that he was this guy Malcolm Watford, who studied under Hans Krebs. I was walking out of class with him and I was like doing my like zealous, I don't even know if I was on Ray Pete stuff then or if I was still on like carnivore stuff, but I would sort of like badger my professors like after like to ask them questions and ask them if they'd heard of, you know, oh, have you heard of this like nutritional idea or whatever? And he was just like, yeah, whatever. I think it's all bullshit. Like, if you just, you could like whatever, you could just eat like, you know, lard or whatever up to your caloric requirement as long as you have, you know, like enough protein and like whatever essential nutrients and just fill in the rest of the calories with like whatever bullshit and it'll be fine. So that was kind of his opinion too. His advice after class, like the last thing was like, get on the scale in your house, you know, if you have a scale or something, and weigh yourself and just try not to weigh more than that, like for the rest of your life.
I mean, that's kind of what it seems to be. That's kind of the pushback I would say against diet culture right now is just like, don't get fat. Basically, like, it doesn't matter what you eat, don't get fat. And I guess that's not parsing the ideas where it's like, well, there are probably certain things that we're eating that are contributing to us getting fat. And also, I was curious, when you said the potato diet diminishing the absorption of endotoxin, aren't starches usually worse for endotoxin? So you'd think they would maybe aggravate the absorption, increase it?
Yes, but on the potato hack diet, you are not eating any fats. And to absorb, I guess unless you have some type of gut pathology, to absorb endotoxin across the enterocytes. And this is my my personal explanation as to why there are negative results from saturated fat. So I still don't believe that saturated fatty acids, especially stearic acid and some of the medium and short chain fatty acids, palmitic, I don't know, up in the air, whatever. But the reason why I think dietary, so once they're in the body, it's kind of a different story, but dietary fatty acids, saturated fatty acids, are the best medium for shuttling endotoxin into your system. And they're also good at moving it around. There's an interesting paper that sort of like tried to destroy a lot of endocrine, like immunological research on saturated fatty acids by saying all of the reagents people use are contaminated with endotoxin, lipopolysaccharide. It was by these authors, Erich and Samani. I think I still have my review of that paper. So I had a blog before I had a YouTube channel, and I think it's like nutrichronology.com. I think because one of my friends, so I let it lapse because I wasn't using it. And I just didn't want to pay like whatever, $20 a year to keep it. And some fucking squatter, one of these companies in like Vietnam or something, bought the domain and sat on it. And I was even going to offer, because at one point I wanted it back. I was going to offer a certain amount of money, but they wanted like, I don't know, $2,000 or something. I forget what it was. And I was just like, God damn it. And I almost offered them. I think I did make an offer that was less than that, and it just didn't get to them, whatever. And then they had it for like 5 years. And then I kind of lost interest. And then my friend was like, oh, I got your website back.
No
I
way.
guess it just lapsed. So he just like gave me the keys, and then so anyway, and I think everything's uploaded on there. I don't know. I haven't even been there, but I wrote this, this review of this paper about saturated fatty acids and like an alternate explanation for inflammation that is seen in these experiments, which is that endotoxin is like everywhere, especially things like bovine serum albumin, which is a common reagent in a lot of experiments, and just tons of stuff. And saturated fatty acids, it brings it into the system. It brings it to the cells. It's like specifically to the receptors that would be picking up these inflammatory signals and doing the whole thing. So anyway, about the potato hack diet, if you are consuming no fat, especially no saturated fat, again, unless you have like a really bad gut barrier condition, you should basically stop absorbing endotoxin, even if it's being produced in your gut.
Okay. And so you think that, so for anyone that doesn't know, endotoxins, toxin produced in your gut and can block mitochondrial respiration. So, prevents your burning of calories. You think that the super, super high carb just kind of opens the, it's like hitting the gas pedal, flooring the gas to allow the mitochondria to just churn away and burn fat, burn everything.
Well, I think it just cuts out that source of inflammation. So like if you just take endotoxin and just administer it to somebody, like in an injection, you will cause them to become insulin resistant, like immediately at that time. And you could like put them into septic shock if you wanted to, if you gave them a big enough dose. But a small dose, something that would be associated with, so it's called postprandial endotoxemia. And to some extent, everybody absorbs some small amount, right? It's kind of like one of those things that's just impossible to fully avoid. But I wish I had saved these papers, but back when I was doing my PhD, I was reading a bunch of heart disease papers that did a test for postprandial endotoxemia, and all of their heart disease patients had it, as in after a meal, they had a higher than normal, like a quite obvious higher than normal amount of blood endotoxin, and then the control groups in every experiment. So basically, unfortunately, saturated fat is like, I don't know what the deal is with that, and I don't know the solution. Some people just have those bacteria producing the endotoxin and in the right spot, and when they eat food with saturated fat, it gets into their blood, and probably, and also causes their cholesterol to go up, because cholesterol goes up in response to any kind of infection.
It's the good cholesterol,
though, right? But yeah, so that is that's what I think is going on with saturated fat. I don't think, because the body, like if you eat carbs, if you eat a zero fat diet, your body makes a ton of saturated fat. I mean, not like a ton, but like it makes it a lot. It preferentially makes saturated fatty acids and then monounsaturated fatty acids secondarily. And when it does liponeogenesis.
Isn't it just lipogenesis? Is it liponeo? So it's lipo.
Because they say gluconeogenesis, they add the neo because that's supposed to differentiate from glucose. Actually, that doesn't make sense. But is it gluconeogenesis if you make two pyruvates back into a glucose? Or is that
Yes.
just so it's all just glucogenesis? Always has been.
Eureka.
Okay, yeah. So the semantics aren't super important, but your body making virgin fatty acids that were not fatty acid, not changing a fatty acid, but making a fatty acid from like a carbohydrate. Yeah, they're going to be mostly saturated. And so in other words, a low fat diet where you're getting most of your calories from carbs is kind of a high saturated fat diet in the sense that your circulating fatty acids will tend towards the ones that you make, which are mostly saturated, and then some unsaturated. The same as pigs, right? If you give pigs, there's like Chris Masterjohn used to do a lot of stuff with this, like the pigs and like some island in the South Pacific where they just eat like coconuts and like carbs, and their body fat is like more saturated than butter. Whereas, of course, because they're like us, if they are fed carbs, they make mostly saturated, some unsaturated, monounsaturated fat. But if they're fed fatty acids, they use and store those fatty acids, reflective of their diet. So in America, we give them, like corn and soy and stuff, and supplement with oil, and then that becomes their fat stores. But it doesn't have to be that way for pigs.
Got to get some tropical pigs. That is the key. So I kind of just wanted to round this off. We obviously talked about a wide diversity of topics here, but so navigating like the diet paradigms, like trying to figure out what works for you. What's your advice there? Like, because and for anyone that doesn't know, you've been vegan, you went a raw vegan, you went carnivore, went raw carnivore. I'm sure you were at least in ketosis at some point there. And now you've fallen into the pro-metabolic world, kind of high carb, mostly saturated fat, decent amount of protein. Having done all of that, what would be your advice to yourself when you started at point A to get yourself to where you are now as fast as possible? So I don't have to go through all those phases. So I'm about to try raw vegan after this.
Specifically with the raw vegan, I did not know how to get enough calories or protein. And it took me years because I believed in it so much. And I lost all of so I started lifting weights in high school and I just ate whatever. I was just like a teenager. I think I got Michael Eades, Eades. He's sort of a contemporary of Atkins. I think he's still around. And he wrote a book, like Protein Power. He's written several books, kind of low carb stuff. And this one was marketed as like high protein, but whatever. And I somehow that was like floating around my parents' house when I was in like middle school or early high school. And I used to just pick up books that like were sitting around and read them. Like I read this one about the South African, like post-apartheid reconciliation by this journalist. It's like the shittiest book ever. And I have like a real issue with completionism. Like it's very hard for me to start something and not feel compelled to finish it. So like I start reading. Yeah. So I read this Michael Eades book. So the only prejudicing ideas I had when I started lifting weights in high school was just eat enough protein. And of course you hear that also just in the gym or whatever. And then when I started going vegetarian, I lost some weight. I lost some muscle. But I was like, oh, I'll just get it back. My body has to like adapt to vegetarian protein or whatever. But I didn't really know how to get enough protein. And I just didn't really. And then I just kept I was like going in I kind of like made a little mistake and then like kept going in that direction. It's like, oh, we're like losing money with this strategy. Like, okay, do it harder. So then it was like vegan. And I don't think I spent that much time doing like cooked veganism or whatever, non-raw. Because in addition to the completion thing, it's like, I tend towards like extremes, which I think I've actually gotten over that quite a bit. So that's like the one change. That's something that you should do if you're into diets, is not like if you are somebody who needs to do something extreme, like you find something else to do something extreme. because this whole like kind of, this happens a lot. Like people will be like a vegan and then they'll be like a carnivore, which I did.
Yeah.
So I just like lost all of my muscle. It was like so depressing. And I believed in the diet so much that I was like, well, it'll just come back at some point. Like something, my body will be able to build muscle on whatever, like bananas and it only happened when I added animal foods back and started eating enough calories, and it happened pretty fast. So that's like a really good data point for me. And so you like if like we were saying, you should try not to let yourself like gain a lot of weight, like get fat, because it's hard to it's harder to reverse that than to just maintain. But especially like as a guy, like if you're into like weightlifting and stuff, it's quite hard. It's a real pain in the ass if you just do a crazy diet where you lose all your muscle. So don't do that. But I think so. The things that have stuck with me after all those experiences is like, I think that actually paying attention to calories and macronutrients is a good idea. You shouldn't do like an extreme caloric deficit to lose weight, and you shouldn't overeat a ton of calories. You should kind of try to figure out like what your base needs are and get a relationship maybe with being able to eyeball foods and like understand, and also satiety signals and all that. Eat enough protein. Pay attention to gut, how things react in your gut. I spent a lot of time believing like, okay, this diet's good for me. And then I would like drink a smoothie that's like 20 bananas and then like feel really gassy, and then do that like every day. And like, you don't really want to play around with that, because you never know if, you're giving all this like digestible material to bacteria that you weren't giving it before, and it's like changing things up. You never know when you could like fall into a really serious like microbiome pathological condition. Like that's really not something to play around with.
Mm-hmm.
Same as like just, I mean, I know in the repeat world, people take a lot of antibiotics, usually the kind of more gentler ones, but that is something I wouldn't take too lightly. Especially like serious, strong antibiotics. I mean, there's a lot of people that just are fine, and then they get a bad infection, they're put on antibiotics, and then they have gut issues for like 10 years. So I think the gut, this is like beyond obvious, but for some reason diet culture like makes this very confusing. If something that you're eating is like makes your gut feel bad, like that's just don't do that,
Yeah. I also think it's important. Like for me, I do sourdough. I do fine with sourdough, but like occasionally, like I just love pasta. And so if I were to eat, like, if I were to double down and be like, oh yeah, I'm on the high pasta diet and just eat it all the time, I could probably wreck my gut. But if I understand I might be a little bloated after I eat too much pasta and I eat it once a week or a couple times a month, probably not going to have a very detrimental effect. So it's kind of like understanding the relationship with food in your body.
Yeah, you should be eating stuff, because this is one thing I like about Ray's philosophy, which I kind of used to not like so much. In some ways, I don't like it, but he's always about like almost instantaneous effects. Like, oh, I changed this in my diet, and like the next day I felt, or that minute, like I put coconut oil on my rice and started to lose weight, or like I felt warmer.
Yeah,
like right then. And in some ways it's like, okay. And then if you try that and you don't feel that right away, you're kind of like, what's going on? Right. And then if things with like fatty acids, it's like, okay, maybe these things have to turn over in your body. And there's a lot of stuff going on that's like long-term, but actually I think there's a lot to be said for paying attention to like short-term things. Cause that's actually what the diet, like belief is mostly trying to overcome. Like, the funny stories of people that are vegans and they're like, oh, I'm losing my hair, or like I had a tooth fall out, and people are like, oh, you're just detoxing.
That tooth was not necessary.
there's like all of these signs. And even me, like for the longest time, I was like, well, I think theoretically it's good for me to eat like whatever it is, like whether it's a certain food, a certain combination of foods, maybe a certain number of meals, whatever it is. It's like, I think in the abstract, this is good for me, but it's not making me feel good. And you still kind of push through,
Mm.
And that's really like outside of a short, like maybe few days adjustment period. If you make like a big change in your diet, like you might feel weird, but if it continues on like past that, there's really like, you should really seriously reconsider what's going on.
Do you also find that you've become more sensitive, the more in tune your diet you've become? Because I found like the longer I've been peating, hashtag, like certain things that I would try, like let's say like the blue stuff or like a B vitamin complex, I'll experience much more of an effect compared to, a couple of years ago when my diet was just absolute trash. It's like you add a little bit of coconut oil in, and not that I feel like anything crazy from adding some coconut oil in now, but I definitely wouldn't have felt anything. Now I feel like smaller incremental things might have a more profound effect now.
I don't know. I've never really felt, and this is one of the reasons why it was easy for me to fall into like deep belief in certain diets and to think of more like long-term effects, because I've never been that sensitive to the short-term effects of things, except things that make my gut feel bad. And that's pretty much it.
Not even like carbs and energy.
Yeah. Well, once I added carbs back, I mean, I was having chronic problems with headaches, like migraines, because I had this like funny schedule where I was off on Tuesdays in my first year of graduate school, and I would do a Muay Thai class and then a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu class Tuesday morning on an empty stomach. So like 2 whatever hours of that, and then come home and eat like meat, and fat. And then I would start feeling a migraine approaching and like in the midday. And then I would just feel like total garbage and like into Wednesday. And this would just happen every week. And it didn't matter how much meat I ate. And it was pretty obvious what was going on.
Yeah.
So adding carbs back in, like that's one way. People have to figure out like what they're sensitive to. So for me, it's like if I undereat in general, or if I don't eat carbs, I can feel like, almost like a migraine feeling. It's like, I don't know, like as my liver gets sort of low on glycogen, I don't know why that's how it expresses itself. But it's really not like I could not eat for a while, like most of a day, and be okay. But I mean, I couldn't like suck all my glycogen out in like a jiu-jitsu workout on an empty stomach and then not, eat carbs and then be okay.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of like it's like I figured out, you get like an idea of like how much energy reserves you have, and like that kind of information is really valuable.
Yeah. Like what you can go without needing your Snickers bar, whatever it is in that commercial.
Yeah, like a lot of endurance athletes, like they kind of know, like, okay, at mile whatever, like I need that like gel stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What is your like framework generally for a diet now? If I come to you and say, hey Kyle, need help starting somewhere.
Yeah, well, I ask people like what their goals are, because I don't really have I really don't have a diet recommendation. If like different initial questions would be like, are you already doing something specific, or are you just not? And under that heading, it's kind of like, do you have ideas of like what's healthy, and like what are you going for? Are you trying to like lose weight or something like that? And do you want to experiment? Do you want to do something that's like extreme, or like kind of interesting, or do you just want to make like incremental changes? Like, are you the kind of person that wants to count calories and figure out what you're eating and then change it from there? Or do you want to just kind of be given what to eat before knowing what you're eating now? Like, because that's a big difference.
Yeah, staunch differentiation.
I prefer, like, if somebody was going to ask me for diet advice, I would prefer that they tell me, like, that they collect some data on themselves and then say, like, this is, I don't know, like, I feel too tired or I want to lose weight or whatever. I've been weighing my food, like, get a food scale. See, that sounds like a lot, but is it? And if you really care, I'm just saying.
Yeah. I mean, even a food log, I feel like is less invasive. It's just like, all right, I ate this. How'd I feel after?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I guess not everybody is going to want to get like to the calorie specific. So that a food log is good too. But I feel like when people are talking about athletics or losing weight, the number of calories is important, because if somebody comes to you and they're like having trouble losing weight and they're really not eating a lot of calories, that's a very different situation than somebody who's eating like a normal amount of calories or a little bit more than, like, whatever, like, oh, I'm eating 3,000 calories a day and I want to lose weight. It's like, oh, okay, we've got like some room to play with. But if like somebody comes to you and they're like, oh, I'm eating like 1,600 calories a day and I can't lose weight, and they're not really super small, it's like, ooh, like you might have like a, you know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah, you got a problem there.
Yeah, so if you told like those two different people the same diet, like, I feel like that's irresponsible.
That's true. Well, I want to be respectful of your time. Don't want to keep you too long. Thank you for coming on. I really appreciate you for taking time. It's always fun to catch up. Where can everyone find you?
Oh, I don't know where. I mean, the same stuff. I haven't
been active on social media. We need to get you back.
Yeah.
Kyle King.
So
Zebrafish, man.
Yeah, Zebra King. I keep thinking to myself, like, oh, okay, I can make a YouTube video. I should do a stream. I've been meaning for over a year now to do a stream on Mike. Was it Menser?
Mm-hmm.
I downloaded one of his diet books, and I wanted to just go through it and talk about some of his philosophies, because I think they're like strangely close to Pete ideas, but then like somehow like Ayn Rand.
Okay.
Also, like he calls himself an objectivist, but then he talks about how like exercising is an energy wasting activity, and the way he talks about energy and stuff, it's like very reminiscent of Pete. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, I just can't say if I will make content in a meaningful way on the internet. I mean, I just don't know.
I would love to watch that live stream if you ever get around to it. I dove into Menster's work a little bit too. Not too much though.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many interesting things to talk about. So what draws me to making content is when topics that I don't think people are, because I'm not needed to talk about Ray Pete, really. Let's talk about carbs. I mean, there's like more than enough stuff like that. But like I have like, my notes app in the iPhone, like just a bunch of, I mean, some of them are very, very like cryptic. Like I'll just wake up in the middle of the night and be like, oh, this would be a good video. And it's like, looks weird afterwards. Like one of them says like water is a nanomaterial. But this totally makes sense to me when I like a video about how water is a nanomaterial, which it is. And by nanomaterial, I mean, I think this is the technical definition of a nanomaterial. It's when a small amount of something has radically different properties than a large amount of that thing. So like carbon nano tubes made of, like things where if you just have a few molecules or atoms, they behave in a way that's very different than if you have like a whole pile of it.
That's fascinating. Did not know that.
And water is that. So if you just have a few molecules of water, specifically between two surfaces, this is kind of the Gerald Pollack stuff, it behaves completely different than like a glass of water, like with your finger in the water. It's totally different. So yeah, there's like I have a ton of like stream ideas and a ton of solo video ideas. It's just yeah, I don't know. It's like I never really understood when people said, "Oh, I don't have time to do something." And I don't think that's what they mean. I think what they mean is like I don't have the chronospatial environment. And so it's like a combination of like time, but also time in a place that's conducive to the thing. Like, you know, you're living in a small apartment with somebody and it's like, I'm not going to like make them be quiet for 2 hours so I can like stream about Mike Menser and how he's kind of like rapey.
Well, you could do this, set up in the library.
Yeah, this is the first time I did this.
Turned out great.
There's actually like a interactive like big screen there, and like there's one of these like long tables.
Oh, it's dope. So you'll look really professional. So we're gonna get you back tomorrow. This is the Mensa stream is coming live.
Yeah, I guess I could. I probably won't be here for too much longer, as in working at this place, because my lab is moving. That's another thing. So I was like, oh, I don't like the zebrafish. But one of the main reasons is that the boss of my lab just took a position at Uppsala University, which is about an hour north of Stockholm, and I'm just not going to go there. I mean, I'd go there for like a little while, but I'm not going to move to Uppsala. It's a great town.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm here. I'm a Stockholmer.
Nice. A Stockholmer?
Yeah.
That's not how they say it.
Yeah, and Stockholmer.
Gotcha. Yeah. Kyle, thank you very much for taking the time. Speaking of where to follow you, it's a Nutrichronology and Genius Bits on Instagram, right?
Word up.
Yep. All right, there you go. All right, guys, thanks for tuning in. Till next time, be good.
Yeah.
If you made it this far, make sure to hit that like and subscribe button if you're on YouTube. And if you're not on YouTube, please just give us a 5-star review wherever you're podcasting. It really helps us out, helps other people to see this content. And I just want to thank Kyle one more time for taking his time. I really appreciate it, and I hope you guys enjoyed this one. Until next time, guys, be good.